Yeah, to start things off, let's just give us a brief overview of where the Canadian rental market stands right now, and what are some key trends that you might be seeing in the future?
Yeah, I think, the best way that I can describe it is I think we are in a transitional period. I've heard other people describe it as almost like a calm before the storm. We're seeing a few trends play out right now. One of which is some major institutional money coming into the space. We're seeing U.S. competitors or U.S. operators start to show a real interest in the Canadian market, and actually, in particular, British Columbia and Vancouver and Victoria. So companies like Greystar and Hines are starting to pop up on the radar for sure lately. We're seeing an unbelievable amount of construction in multifamily. And I know that's maybe dampened down in the last year or so with interest rates and whatnot, but just the trend over the last 5 years towards multifamily has been, really encouraging. We're seeing a backdrop that includes, really aggressive immigration policies that is adding a certain flavor to the entire industry. And we're also seeing something really interesting right now with older rental stock, which is also unprecedented. We are seeing unbelievably low turnover rates, like turnover rates that we've never seen, especially and obviously in rent-controlled provinces. So that's a trend that certainly we'll talk about probably a lot today. We're also seeing a interesting trend occur in the most expensive markets in Canada. We're in the most expensive market in Canada to be a renter in Vancouver, but the second most generally is Toronto. Both markets are actually experiencing a level of rent deflation in the last year over year, which is something I think we're not used to, I would say, right? And so we'll probably talk a lot about that today through various presentations and what that really means and the implications. And the last thing I'll point out that is certainly a trend at the moment, and it does play into all of those other things, is we are experiencing a shifting in consumer demand and consumer preference in the rental space. So obviously with work from home and roommates and a prioritization of affordability, and those are probably the three key changes in preferences we're seeing. So to say the least, overall, the market today across Canada, but especially here, is very, very different than 24 months ago. Like we're in a kind of a totally new world.
And even like before 24 months ago, like I'm no student of history, but I do remember COVID-19 was a big deal. But ever since that occurred, have there been any unexpected shifts in rental prices or demand that maybe starts from 2020, 2021, and maybe how it's evolved since then? And are we going back? Like, what do we think since COVID started?
On a national level?
Yeah.
So at a national level, we continue to see rents increase. Our rent report will come out, I think, on Tuesday next week. But one of the neat things about being here is we'll get kind of an exclusive sneak peek into this last month's rental data today, especially for BC and Vancouver, and David will be covering that next. But on a national level, we still are seeing rents increase. So that number will probably fall between 4% and 6% when the report drops in 2 days. And even though that seems like a healthy number, it is part of a trend here for the last several months of disinflation. So rents are moderating at the moment nationally. And on the demand side, you mentioned demand. I think this is where things are really interesting. Like, it's really a tale of two stories and two groups, let's say. You've got, obviously, like I mentioned, this like torrid pace of immigration and newcomers, temporary foreign workers, and international students. And even though temporary foreign workers, international students might slow down a little bit, there's obviously huge demand coming from that group. But at the same time, current residents in Canada are not moving. They're not moving right now. And, this is for a number of reasons, which we'll probably get into, and this is especially true in rent-controlled markets. But overall, the demand picture is more outweighed by the not moving of current residents than all of the newcomer activity. And so actually rental demand, and this is something people might find surprising, from an online search standpoint, and we're not talking about rentals.ca, we're not talking about just our properties, but from an online search standpoint, rental demand in Canada has, from a volume standpoint, not recovered to its peak, which was actually in 2018.
So before COVID, yeah.
Before COVID. And it's probably 20, 30% down from that peak. So demand overall is down in terms of just online search activity for rental apartments in the country.
And you mentioned like a ton about demand already, because we also hear about the supply and demand issues. We all can see the vacancy rates that we're seeing, especially, British Columbia, Vancouver, but how significant on a national scale is this dynamic of supply and demand? And are there any other factors at play that maybe when you think about that are influencing the rental market across Canada?
Yeah. Well, the two factors that I would add to it would be inflation, but also rent control. And it's obviously both those factors play into it, but it's really like the combination and how they work together that is having the biggest influence on the demand curve. And ultimately, what's occurred in the last few years is that inflation itself has outpaced the allowable guideline increases in rent-controlled provinces by a huge factor, like a factor of 3 to 4 in some provinces. And as that's occurred, what we're seeing is a population of renters currently in place who are actually realizing right now that, and it seems counterintuitive, they're realizing right now that the most affordable thing in their entire life is their apartment or their rental home when it's rent controlled. And so I think what's kind of just shocking about it is, people used to move, right? People used to just move. They move for various reasons, right? Lifestyle reasons. They want a bigger place. They want a better place. They want to move in with a significant other to a new place or grow their family and get more space. Doesn't really matter what the reason is. It was convenience and it was a choice. Mm-hmm. And we're just not seeing people prioritize those things right now. We're seeing people prioritize because of the cost of living in everything but their actual dwelling has gone up. We're seeing people prioritize affordability, and what that's ultimately resulted in is this record low turnover. Turnover in British Columbia right now, CMHC reported at below 9%. That is insane to me, like 9%, right? Like when I first got involved in this industry, 2014 year, but even before that, like normal turnover was like 25%, right? You get a 100-unit building, 25 people move out in a year. 9 people is unbelievable. Like we're really only seeing people move when they really have to, they have to move cities or, for whatever reason.
I think because, we are in Vancouver, we're in British Columbia, I think we should shift a little bit to what we're seeing here. And BC has obviously been a massive topic, and it will be in our new Rentals.ca Rent Report. It's a plug for our man David, who's speaking next, but especially Vancouver. No surprise, Vancouver is going to be on the top of the most expensive cities. Can you dive into what's driving these high asking rents in Vancouver, but also, the province as a whole?
Yeah. Well, I think you can look outside. It's a very beautiful place. We have mountains and ocean, and probably the warmest weather in Canada for a large city. So I think that's probably at the very top of it. People want to live here. Very desirable location. I always enjoy my time here. Come to Whistler once a year, hang out with friends here. It's awesome, right? But also that imposes geographical limitations. There's ocean on one side and there's mountains all around. And so there is a limit of space that maybe we don't have as a limitation in the prairies or even really in Ontario as much. And so, that's a unique factor. But I think, and those things can't really be helped. But I think what is maybe more unfortunate and has resulted in particularly high rents, because there's other cities in North America that have those factors, is a compounding of decades of terrible government policies from multiple levels. And these are policies that everybody here knows about, but, rent control policies, and also insanely high, like, municipal development fees, and other anti-landlord policies that just increase the risk of investment into housing while also decreasing the reward side. That's probably the biggest factor, in terms of what can be helped, right? And then, don't get me wrong, like, Vancouver is at the very, very, very top of the list here in Canada in terms of rental rates, and it's also right up there in North America and globally. But we are seeing now in the last 2 quarters, as I mentioned, not just disinflation but deflation, and I think that number is 6.1%. That will come out in a couple of days. 6.1% year over year average asking rent decrease now in Vancouver. So it's starting to become actually like a fairly significant number. I think what's occurring now is sort of an extrapolation of those trends, those consumer preferences I had mentioned before, but Vancouver is most susceptible to those changing consumer preferences because it started at the highest rate, with the highest market rent. And so Toronto is also actually experiencing rent deflation as well as the second, most expensive market in the country. And it's struggling with the same situation. It's most susceptible to those changing consumer preferences. So that's what we're seeing here right now.
Are those numbers that comes as a surprise to you that it's been so consistent now? We're seeing the rent prices in Vancouver and Toronto, because I know that's always the first question that I get when I ask about a rent report is, the most expensive cities are actually going down in some way. They're surprised when I talk about it in the media, and I'm assuming that it was a little surprising for you as well.
Yeah, at first, for sure, the first couple of months we saw it. Again, it's now been 2 straight quarters. So, actually, I think in Vancouver, it might be 7 straight months at this point of year over year, deflation. And it does seem right now to still be accelerating somewhat. So I don't think we've hit the bottom. Like, we might see a 7 or an 8, and maybe further. You never really know, right? I'll also add, I think something that Toronto and Vancouver have in common is that, and why they're even more susceptible is, I think both Toronto and Vancouver have built up over decades a very strong downtown office culture as well. And I think that, which is unique to those 2 cities. Like, there's other cities obviously that have that, but those 2 cities in particular, right? And I think those downtown cores where rents are most expensive are definitely, like, that is a consumer preference that's hitting hard here, which is work from home. Just move a little bit further outside of the city. If you do have to commute a couple times a week, that's just a trade-off now that isn't so bad when it used to be kind of 5 days a week, right? So I think that's hitting, and it is surprising. But when you really peel it back, it's not surprising, right? Like, with all the inflation that's occurred, and the rent control policy and the way that they're working in combination.
Yeah, I kind of want to focus a little bit more, because you mentioned a lot about, especially Vancouver and British Columbia, that there's a lot of limitations for where you can build. There's mountains, there's the ocean. There definitely is a lot of limitations with this area in Canada, but obviously the governments know about this. So what are we seeing the provinces and maybe even local municipalities throughout British Columbia do to try to tackle the supply and demand imbalance that we're seeing?
It feels like it's always 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and that's not unique to British Columbia or Vancouver. It's kind of what we see right across the country. I think the biggest issue remains when you just talk to developers, it remains development fees. Obviously, interest rates are an issue, but there's light at the end of the tunnel there that we can see, right? So development fees have remained super high, if not increased in some of the municipalities around here. I think even Vancouver just recently announced a further increase. And it's just so irrational, right? Like we tax housing at a higher rate than cigarettes or alcohol. You don't tax things you need or want or that are healthy, right? So, it's driven by a lot of short-term thinking. The irony of the whole thing is, when you build housing, you are creating a long-term sustainable revenue source of property taxes. So you should be making it as easy really to get to that point as possible. So we have seen, obviously through like federal incentives, some municipalities looking at development fees and abatements, but haven't really seen it at a large scale yet, right? Mm-hmm. We're also seeing a lot of municipalities and provinces, I think British Columbia as well, jumping on the ban short-term rentals bandwagon, which, the theory is, okay, take short-term rentals out of the market. This comes back into the long-term rental pool and helps from a supply standpoint. I think though the scale has just been completely overestimated. It's such a drop in the bucket compared to the overall problem. And I don't think consequences are necessarily being thought through as well, which is that, the short-term rentals support a hospitality industry. They support the overall investment into housing and property rights to be able to kind of do what you need with your property. And it could be having an opposite effect on investors into the space, particularly in the condo market. When you look at condo pre-con sales, they're dead, and there's not really going to be development of condos at any scale across this country for quite some time. And a huge factor in that, and that's housing supply we need, regardless if it's condo or not. In Toronto, I'm not sure on the stat in Vancouver, but in Toronto, more than 50% of the condos that get developed end up rental. It's supply we need, but you're scaring out investors by telling them what they can and can't do with their properties. And so, but we've seen that because it's easy and it's quick. I've seen some more unique and what I think are called progressive policies, especially in Calgary around office to residential conversion, with a recognition that, there's been a lot of studies on this, only maybe 15 to 20% of office towers across the country are really even feasible or candidates for those types of conversions. So we're not talking about convert every office, but there are cities, and Calgary's probably the leading city in the country. I don't think Vancouver or Toronto has quite got on this bandwagon yet, and half of it is the fact that it's the largest source of municipal tax revenue is commercial property tax. So they don't want to do away with it, but it's a dangerous game to continue to have that dependence if office vacancy is continuing to rise, which it is. And so we are seeing some provinces and some cities, and I assume there will be others. There are councillors talking about it in Toronto. I'm sure there's councillors talking about it here, putting programs into place for commercial to residential incentives, or incentive programs. And that's sort of some of the policy that I'd like to see more of, is that long-term thinking. And yeah, but I mean, other than that, there's not necessarily that much movement. There's a lot of talk, but not necessarily a lot of action, unfortunately.
Nice positive way to. I think we should maybe talk a lot directly to the people here today. These are people in the industry. We got property managers, marketing people. We got some developers as well. Like, what are the biggest challenges for property managers and developers in this current rental market landscape? And then maybe on the flip side, some more positivity. What are some opportunities that you might see right now?
Yes, let me try to remain positive. Right?
Yes.
Well, here's something. Interest rates went down yesterday.
Yeah.
And then there may have been or may not have been an announcement by a certain politician that maybe you like or you don't like. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe there's a federal election coming. We don't know.
Everyone, yeah.
Well, like probably the number one challenge in the last couple of years has been financing interest rates. But then again, we're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel here. Like rates are going to continue to come down. So don't focus on that so much. I think we may actually run into a new problem. It's just like whenever we catch a break, rates are coming down, maybe something else pops up, right? So the problem we might run into, and I don't think that this is necessarily being so publicly recognized yet, or even recognized by like bank institutions, is it's not good that rents are coming down. There's rent deflation in Vancouver and Toronto. When you're trying to aggressively underwrite a new 500 unit, development in Vancouver. And so, yeah, the financing costs on the project are coming down. That's great. It's going to make your pro forma look better, but, your rent roll might be coming down. And that's going to be a new challenge, right? So I do think I'll speak from a developer standpoint first. You might see, at least in the next few months to 6 to 12 months, like maybe more of a focus actually on applications outside of downtown cores in Toronto and Vancouver, on the outskirts, safer land to work with where rents are still actually increasing or steadier. I don't think that trend will go on forever in Vancouver and Toronto. So, you don't have to worry about that in probably the long term. But that's something new, right? Something new to consider, and keep an eye on. So I think that'll be a challenge for sure. Because here we are, like, we need the housing supply and we think it's good that rents are coming down, but is it? It's kind of the same argument in the housing market, right? It's like, our prime minister had to kind of clarify, well, we don't want house prices to come down. We just want them to stay where they're at, right? Because it's also not good if they come down, right? There's a flip side to everything. So.
I'm curious too, like, again, saying that I'm a renter as well, the idea and what people normally do is, rent and eventually transition to home ownership. And I think there's a bubble right now in this country of people looking for interest rates to go down to maybe get into that housing market. Do you think that, like, even if they lower interest rates 2-3 more points, like, do you think it's just a drop in the bucket? Like, do you think there's enough turnover just from that? Maybe home ownership is now more accessible, so then that increases turnover. Kind of seems like it's a small part, but that's kind of what I'm looking forward to personally. But I think,
well, let me ask people, if interest rates come down 75 more basis points, is housing affordable now? Are they going out and buying a house? Like, maybe a bit, but they were so low. They're so much lower. So I'm not certain that that's like very significant. It'll help though. It'll help increase turnover. I'm not sure turnover can go much lower than 8 or 9%. I mean, it sounds a bit morbid, but even people like die,
Yeah.
People die or people need to move into long-term care facilities, and we have an aging population. Like that's part of turnover, and like that's got to represent, I don't know, 5% at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't think it can go much lower at least. Yeah.
Well, if we want to maybe now look ahead a little bit, let's go 2 years, 24 months. What do you kind of think that the rental market in Canada is going to look like? And are there any major shifts that maybe you anticipate in the next 2 years and maybe a little bit further?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said, this is an accelerating trend in Vancouver and Toronto where rents are deflating. So I don't think like the media has like fully caught onto that, or the public has fully caught onto that. And I think as they do, which won't be that much longer, it creates sort of like a perceptual shift to the consumer as well. And I think like that's something that marketers and leasing staff, especially, like really need to kind of stay in touch with and understand. So, I expect that that's going to start to become a real storyline. Especially if it goes on another quarter or another 2 quarters. Definitely like keep an eye on that. And I would say like from a competition standpoint, when the market's moving like that, and I mean, you have to keep an eye on it. You have to stay in touch with it more than ever before. It's actually like not so difficult when things are just going up. If you're not super in touch with it, you'll leave a little money on the table here and there. But the flip side when the market's going down is if you're not keeping up with like real time data and you're able to keep a very close eye on what your competition is doing, you don't leave money on the table. You just like leave all the money on the table. You don't rent your units. So I think more than ever, just competitive analysis and making sure you know what's going on around you is in the next 2 years in this market in particular will be critical. And I think in general, what you'll see in Canada, well, we're already seeing it because again, rents are not down in Canada and they're up a lot in certain markets. Like we'll be in Calgary for the Roadshow, in 2 weeks. There's a market that's just continuing to fly and same with Edmonton. But we're continuing to see basically a flattening of rents across the country. The upper end markets are kind of coming down a bit. The more affordable markets are coming up. It's pretty in line with consumer preferences, which is it's less important where you live now. Affordability is more important. Work from home. And so I think we'll continue to see that. And that's competition, in a sense. It's no longer, okay, I'm competing against a building across from me, but it's also like I'm competing against like somebody just moving to a different city or even a different province. We've seen so much interprovincial migration to Alberta, from, Ontario and probably British Columbia as well, right? So yeah, I think keeping up with it is like the most important thing. You don't want to be even like 3 weeks behind, because things can really change.
Yeah, I'm just kind of Max and I are having a nice conversation. We're definitely friends, but he also is my boss and runs this company. So hold your applause. But as a CEO of a company like this, where work from home is actually changing the landscape of where people live now. How's that been for you? Like, how's that trying to bring a culture through our company, but now work from home is almost expected and people are definitely looking that way. And now consumer behaviors change so much where we're seeing provincial migration have people move out of provinces because they don't need to actually live in metro cores anymore. Like, how's that been for you? Just curious because I like going to the office, but
yeah, it really put me on the spot here. Well, like we're a company that did recognize that change in consumer preference, basically right away. Even before COVID, to be honest, like we actually have 2 employees here who are remote Vancouver, sitting over there, Stu and Steven. So, and we've got people all over the country. But at the same time, I do believe like office creates productivity and culture. So it is just, it's about striking a balance like anything else. I will say, like, if I take off like my hat in running this company, and just look at the overall labor market, I think employers were really afraid to ask employees to come back into the office, especially with affordability concerns and people having maybe moved further outside of downtown cores, and that's their expectation. Especially when unemployment was really low. But then we're seeing unemployment rise in the last several months. And that's an accelerating trend. So it's not like it's at the top yet. Like it could get pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
So like this isn't to say that I would do this, but there are going to be employers who are going to feel more and more confident to put their foot down about office policy. And that is maybe something that will help the Torontos and Vancouvers, back, a little bit. And I do see that happening. Like unemployment is going to continue upwards for sure. Bank of Canada does it.
Yeah. But we obviously definitely value that. That's why this could have just been a webinar. But the fact that we want to see everyone's faces, shake people's hands, see all the fun socks that everybody's wearing today. Like it's, we definitely see that the benefit. What do we got today?
I have Space Dog.
I got Superman. Cool. Yeah. Let's keep this positivity then. Because we talk about a lot of things, death, taxes, Trudeau, but what are we particularly excited about as we move forward in the rental market across Canada, and then again, maybe in British Columbia and Vancouver as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to be excited about. being in the industry, especially as interest rates kind of come back down. But there's an influx of money. There is, one of the most underrated trends, I think, for our industry. If we're not talking about the real estate industry, we're talking about the multifamily, residential, purpose-built rental industry, is that, and this has been like my dream for at least 10 years. It's a weird dream. But I want like the average citizen in the country to see a crane in the sky and not say, oh, look, another condo. Like, I'm so sick of that. It's obviously been changing, but people, like consumers, don't necessarily know. We're talking about decades and decades and decades and decades of the predominant development of multifamily being condos. But like, that's changing right now. And I don't think that it's going to go back. I think this is that inflection point. There are more government incentives in place to build rental or condo. Once the condo developers get a taste here of building rental, and it's really their only option right now. Like, I think it's going to continue to take off, which, by the way, is the case in the rest of North America. It's just Toronto and Vancouver, really, that went down this condo path for so long. So I'm really excited about that. It's really good for our industry. It's good for everyone's careers here. This industry is going to grow a lot. And I think we're also probably primed, especially as interest rates come down and with all the government incentives and things. I know they don't feel like they're moving fast enough, but I think we're probably primed in the next 5 years to see like record construction, in purpose-built rentals. It's not this year that it'll happen, but the next few years, record construction. And that's just like really fun to be part of as an industry, whether it's from a career perspective, innovation perspective. For like a vendor, it means we'll have more opportunities to innovate and maybe move from even just being like a leader in Canada to a global leader as well.
And that might actually tie into like our final point today is, maybe it's a little selfish, but what does the future look like for us? Look at Banner or Rentsync. There might be some who don't know, but in November we actually had a strategic merger with Building Stack. What's our future look like? What's your future look like with Building Stack? And how do we see us?
Well, a couple more road shows coming up in the next few months. This is the first one, so pretty stoked to be here. The whole idea behind this is just we really appreciate as a company. It's like definitely one of our core values to be able to get out and talk to our client base and learn from them and gain feedback from them, but just like interact. And that's something that I think we kind of uniquely prioritize. And so we're going to Calgary, and Winnipeg in 2 weeks. And then we'll do an East Coast, run of Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. And so pretty stoked for that. At a higher level, we're a bit crazy. Like we never stop. We're never done. We're never really satisfied. So, we have a lot on our roadmap in terms of software and innovation. We're going to keep bringing out new features, new solutions, a lot around data, which we'll learn about as well today. But yeah, we're very hungry to just continue that journey. And then as it pertains to Building Stack, maybe some of you guys don't know it that well, but you'll learn more about it today. Traditionally Rentsync has been a company that's lived in providing solutions at the top of the funnel, lead generation, marketing services, advertising, and automating all of that. And we didn't really go that much further. But that's like why we decided to merge with Building Stack. First of all, amazing Canadian company, out of Montreal. So fully bilingual solutions as well, which is really rare. And just like such a great culture fit. Jonathan Margell is actually here. He's one of the founders of Building Stack, and he'll be presenting later. But like we couldn't have a better culture fit, right? It's true love. But the product that has been so nice because everywhere that we ended, which was at that lead generation stage, is really where the strength of Building Stack begins. It's a full lead CRM, all the way through to, prospect, management, tenant screening, the application online leasing, right through to, moving that tenant in, and online rent payments, maintenance requests. So it really brought us all the way to the end of the funnel, which was a dream for years here to be able to get there. And now we can like confidently say that we are lead to lease to life. And that's what Building Stack is all about. I'm sure you guys will learn about it a little bit more today. We'll try to keep today like mostly educational, but through that, like we're pulling on a lot of data from our systems to teach you guys things. So you'll also learn a little bit about our platforms as well. But yeah, so that's kind of what the future holds for us. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a lot of cool speakers today, and I think out of time, unfortunately, our chat has come to an end, Max. Everyone, please. Max is a very busy guy, but he definitely came out here to chat with us all. So give him a warm round of applause.
Yeah, thanks, guys.